Hello, my name is Nicole. I'm 35, and my hands can read teeth just as they once read the pages of children's books. For almost 10 years now, I've been walking the corridors of a private clinic where the smell of antiseptic mixes with the quiet whisper of equipment and the voices of patients. Over the years of practice, I've learned not only to treat, but also to manage, to keep schedules, find the right materials from suppliers, resolve conflicts between staff so that the morning appointments run smoothly. I don't like to call myself important, but the fact remains. When the director is away, the keys to his office and some of his duties end up with me. Then I record agreements, process requests, and do what usually remains behind the scenes, the paperwork nobody wants to touch. For the last 2 months, I've lived at a double pace. During the day, appointments, doctor's concentration, and the cold mirror in the evenings, reports, calls to suppliers, and adjusting the work schedule. The boss left. A personal drama had unfolded at his home, requiring his presence, and he asked for a leave. I was asked to fill in. I agreed because I could, and because someone had to do it. But at the end of each day, I felt it. My back ached from leaning over patients, my eyes burned from the lamp, and my soul longed for simple pleasures, warm wind, silence, and the ability to think about nothing. I have a house by the lake, 40 minutes from the city. Quite small, wooden, bought 3 years ago with my savings. It's not an estate, but a refuge, a veranda, a couple of steps to the water, a dock where ripples appear in the mornings, a place where thoughts fall into place without interpretation. I go there a couple of times a month when I need to detach from the noise. There I can sleep until noon, read a paper book, eat what's considered unhealthy, and listen to the sound of water, which seems to erase all the work voices. My parents have keys to the house. They're retired now and love spending weekends there. My younger brother David also has access. He married Diana 2 years ago, and they sometimes come together. About Diana, I must say directly. She's 28, and her appearance in our family was like a wind from a warm direction. Pleasant at first, but then it started changing the contours of everything else. She carries herself with an arrogant ease, talks down to people, and her manner has a challenging edge. Everything about her is polished, and she sometimes addresses my brother as if he were a member of the service staff. At first, I tried to be kind. David seemed happy, and that was enough for me not to interfere. But her remarks about my appearance, about me working too much, and about how it's a pity I don't have a husband, they quietly chipped away at my mood into little splinters. I allowed them to use the house because it often stood empty, and it seemed reasonable to give my brother some space. And then that Friday evening arrived. The director was returning on Monday, and for the first time in 2 months, I could afford a weekend. A plan was already forming in my head. Lazy days, a glass of wine on the veranda, the smell of fried pasta in the kitchen, and no responsibility for other people's problems. After work, I stopped by the store and bought simple things: pasta and sauce, salad, chicken, bread and cheese, a bottle of wine, and chocolate. Little rituals of pleasure. Shampoo and shower gel also ended up in the bag because last time they had run out, and I didn't want to return to the familiar city without freshness. The road to the lake was like a promise. Around 7 in the evening, the sun was setting like a soft red ribbon. The air had turned cool and fresher in my lungs. I rolled down the windows and let the music from the radio flow through the car. On the way, I replayed the recent days in my head. Endless meetings with suppliers, contentious points in the contract, the faces of patients who sometimes came with fear and left with a smile of gratitude. These images tightened and then released their grip, and thoughts of the veranda and a book seemed the only cure. I recognized the turn to the house by the familiar spot where the road narrows between the trees. The treetops whispered, and the air began to smell of damp foliage. I imagined entering, unpacking the bags, pouring wine, and losing myself in a chair. I also felt a slight irritation. David sometimes surprised me, and I didn't like my plans being disrupted without warning. But on a hopeful level, I trusted it was just a trifle. A carefully closed door, and everything peaceful. However, approaching the house, I noticed lights on, bright, as if someone had decided to light every lamp in the house. There were 3 cars in the small parking area. David's silver sedan was a familiar shadow, but the other 2 cars were unknown to me. Music was coming through the walls, loud, rhythmic, the kind that accompanies parties. My heart beat faster. David hadn't warned me, and the guests at the door were unknown. I got out of the car, paused for a second in confusion, and knocked quietly, expecting to hear a familiar voice. The walls swallowed the knock. Inside, the rhythm and laughter drowned out small sounds. I knocked harder, but only bass and conversations that vibrated the air answered. Taking out my keys, I carefully unlocked the door. The metal turned quietly, and the door opened before me. I gathered my courage, pushed it, and entered. The first thing that hit me was the smell, a thick, cloying mix of alcohol, cheap perfume, and overheated air. That smell always evokes something alarming, something that makes you want to step back, as from a flame. I stood on the threshold and breathed it in until my gaze snatched a picture from the semi-darkness that made everything inside me slowly turn over. In my living room, there were about 10 people, maybe a few more. People were laughing, talking, drinking, as if it were their house, as if my walls, my things, my air belonged to them. Diana was standing near the kitchen, a glass in her hand, her lips shiny with wine, her eyes blurred and smug. On the sofa, where I used to read books after work, her parents sat, sprawled out, as if visiting old friends. The rest, unfamiliar faces, men, women, young people, some with phones, some with plates, some just watching. Perhaps they were her cousins, aunts, or distant relatives I'd never seen and never wanted to see. Everything looked unreal, as if someone had made a copy of my life and filled it with other people. On the coffee table in front of the sofa stood bottles, empty, half empty, overturned. Crumbs, wine stains on my rug, curtains wide open, as if they wanted to let out the last remnants of decency. Music blared from a speaker I didn't even own, loud with a dull bass, filling the space with heat and insolence. When I entered, someone noticed me and turned the sound off. The room seemed to empty. All heads turned in my direction, and for a second, there was silence. Viscous, like smoke. I expected to see embarrassment, awkward smiles, maybe an attempt to apologize. But no, they just looked, irritated, as if I had ruined their evening. Diana's face was flushed with wine, her cheeks burned, her movements became sharp. She put her hands on her hips, looked straight at me, and squinting, asked, "What are you doing here?" Her voice was loud, confident, with that particular tone used for waiters who've forgotten an order. I was silent for a second, trying to comprehend, had I misheard. Then I said slowly, "What am I doing here?" "This is my house, Diana. What are you doing here?" She laughed. The laugh was shrill, fake, like cheap glass. "We have a key," she said, "so we can come here whenever we want, to relax." I shifted my gaze to her parents. They averted their eyes. The others just stood and waited, as if it were a scene from a movie where someone had to be the guilty one. "I came here to relax this weekend," I said, restrained, evenly, so my voice wouldn't tremble. "So the party is over. Gather your things and everyone go home." Their faces fell. A second of silence, and then an outburst of indignation. They all started talking at once, as if I had just poured wine on their clothes. "Are you serious? We just got here." "Oh, come on." The voices merged, but the loudest was, of course, Diana's. She turned to them, then to me, and not hiding her contempt, hissed, "Why did this stupid leech even come here?" Then, right to my face, "Get out of here, before we throw you out ourselves." The words hit with coldness. I looked at her, at all these people sitting on my sofa, drinking from my glasses, breathing my air, and felt something inside me clench, break, turn into thin, sharp ice. I looked at her parents, at these silent witnesses, but they just looked away, as if nothing was happening. The others, the same, indifferently, appraisingly, as if I were the intruder. And then I smiled, not because it was funny, just because at that moment, everything inside had already died. "Okay," I said calmly, "I'll leave." I turned around and walked out. The door slammed shut behind me with a dry sound like a blow to a nerve. Through it, from outside, I heard someone shout after me, "Leech! Lonely woman! Stupid old maid!" The rest was drowned in laughter. I walked to the car, still with that strange smile, but inside something almost tangible, heavy, was seething. When I got behind the wheel, my fingers gripped it so hard my knuckles turned white. The road back stretched for a long 40 minutes, but I didn't notice the trees or the streetlights, only the gray line of the highway ahead. I drove like an automaton, while a dull fire grew in my chest. When I finally reached my apartment, my body felt drained. I unloaded the bags. Pasta, wine, bread, everything that was supposed to be my weekend. I put the things away in the kitchen without looking. Then I just sat down at the table and poured myself some mint tea. Steam rose from the mug, and I watched it as something distant, as if someone else's hands were holding the cup. My thoughts returned to David, to where it all started. When he married Diana 2 years ago, I helped pay for the wedding. Not because I wanted them to be grateful, but because he's my brother. They wanted everything like in the movies. A banquet, live flowers, a photographer, music. Our parents asked me to help. Their pension is small, and David was saving but couldn't manage. I wrote a check for $18,000. I remember Diana only said, "Cute," and that was it. No gratitude, no surprise. Then there was the apartment. A year ago, David started having problems. His company cut bonuses, his income dropped. Diana didn't work at all, proudly declaring she wasn't made for work, that her calling was to be a wife, to enjoy life. David came to me, said they needed time. 2 or 3 months until he got back on his feet. Rent, $1,400 a month. I agreed. He's my brother, after all. But 2 or 3 months turned into a year. A whole year I paid for their housing, $17,000. Every month I transferred money to the landlord, telling myself, for the last time. But the phone would ring again. David's voice would sound tired again, and I would transfer again. And now, after all that, I was thrown out of my own house to music I hadn't even chosen. And that's not all. I had a separate savings account with about $25,000. That safety net I had long saved for a sudden need. Illness, repairs, a trip when you need to leave without looking back. I entrusted David with access to this small reserve, explaining it was only for a real emergency. He swore he would. But month after month, reviewing the statements, I began to notice foreign marks, withdrawals of $300, $400, sometimes more. I didn't make scenes. I thought maybe I was mistaken. But each time I returned the amount to him as if a lifebuoy was tearing in my hands and I was gathering it back with a thread of mercy. Then there was Diana's car. For the wedding, I did what many take for granted. As a gift, I helped with the car loan payments. I paid $320 a month, quietly, without fuss, for 2 years straight, until the numbers added up to a much more substantial sum. I sat at the table, the tea cooling in the cup, and in my mind I rearranged the numbers: wedding, rent, car, emergency account. The calculation formed one simple equation. Over 2 years, I had given them more than $50,000. $50,000 that could have been my peace, my reserve, my plan for life's bad weather. $50,000, and in return, the word leech, thrown by Diana through a wine-soaked smile, the order, "Get out," as if I were a guest being chased from someone else's party. I finished my tea, and the decision ripened, like a fruit that cannot be returned to the branch. I decided to stop the support because further patience wasn't a resource. It was exhaustion. Taking my phone, I opened the banking app and found the section for automatic payments. The switch for the rent turned off. The payment for the car canceled. Then, the next morning, I went to the bank in person. There, I was met by Patricia, a manager I had once worked with on clinic matters. Her calm professionalism only helped me straighten my shoulders. I asked to remove David's access to my emergency account, and within minutes, that link was gone. No one should have the right to that money except me. I didn't call David or Diana. I didn't disturb my parents. I went home and waited. A week passed in a kind of tense silence, and exactly 7 days later, the phone rang. David was on the line. He didn't say hello. He immediately launched into a panicked, cold demand. What happened? Why didn't the landlord get the payment? I took a deep breath and said simply, "Because I'm not paying your rent anymore." Silence hung on the line. That mute pause when words burn both sides. I added, "I've also revoked your access to my emergency account and stopped paying the car loan for Diana's car." Silence again, then an explosion. "Have you lost your mind? What's wrong with you?" he shouted. I spoke calmly. "There's nothing wrong with me. For this, you should thank your wife. Remember last weekend when she threw me out of my house?" He hung up. Half a minute later, the phone rang again. Diana. I didn't answer. She called again and again. Messages came. "You're greedy, selfish, getting revenge. How can you do this to family?" I read them and, on the contrary, laughed, quietly and briefly, because the whole parade of their accusations sounded to me like background noise from which reality was being cut off. Half an hour later, Mom called. I answered. "Nicole, dear, what's going on?" she asked anxiously. I laid out the facts. About the party at the lake house, the insults, the stopped transfers, and the revoked account access. Mom listened and paused, and then, softly, with the reproach that was always in her voice when it came to family, "You have to understand David's position. He loves his wife. Diana can be moody sometimes. You should yield for the sake of peace in the family." I felt that old heaviness of relationships pressing on the limits of my patience. "Mom," I said quietly but firmly, "this isn't about compromise. It's about respect. If a person allows themselves to insult me and yet lives at my expense, then there is no respect." I hung up. I know it sounds bad, but I couldn't listen anymore. The following Friday, I went to my house by the lake, the very one where their voices had once sounded, where Diana's laughter had echoed off the walls, leaving a bitter aftertaste of humiliation in the air. But now, everything was different. Earlier in the week, I had called a locksmith I knew and scheduled an appointment. He arrived right on time, a lean man with tired eyes smelling of metal shavings and rain. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, just silently took out his tools, and soon the old locks, which had known too many foreign touches, lay at his feet like shed skin. The new keys shone quietly in my palm, light, cold, a symbol of a new boundary. I paid him in cash, thanked him, and when the door closed behind him, for the first time in a long while, I felt that this house belonged only to me again. To no one else, not David, not Diana, not even my parents. They, after all, not only didn't take my side, but also didn't notice how tired I was, giving everything I could into the bottomless pit of their endless needs. I spent that weekend alone. It was quiet. The water in the lake breathed evenly. The pines stood motionless, like guards at a deserted temple. I read, walked along the shore, cooked myself dinner. Without rush, without guilt, without anyone's gazes. It was the peace I had almost forgotten. A few days passed, and then, on Wednesday evening, when the kitchen already smelled of fried peppers and warm bread, there was a knock at the door. I approached, looked through the peephole, and my heart gave an unpleasant jolt. Mom, Dad, and David. Diana wasn't there, and that admittedly surprised me. Apparently, they guessed her presence would turn the visit into a storm. I opened the door, silently stepped back, letting them inside. We sat at the kitchen table. The air was thick with unspoken words. David spoke first. His voice sounded cautious, like that of a person coming for reconciliation. but his words quickly revealed the true motive. "Nicole, I understand why you're angry," he said. "I talked to Diana, and she's willing to apologize, but on the condition that you restore everything: the rent, the car payments, and the account access." For a second, I couldn't believe my ears. And then I suddenly laughed. The laugh burst out unexpectedly, loudly, as if a dam of absurdity had broken. "Are you serious?" I asked. "I'm not restoring anything, not a cent." Mom lowered her eyes, her lips trembling. Dad, on the contrary, sat motionless, staring at one point, as if he wanted to dissolve into the tabletop. I took my phone, opened the messages, and scrolling through the correspondence with Diana, turned the screen towards them. "Look," I said, "what she's been writing to me all week." They leaned in. Words flashed on the screen. Short, sharp, venomous. Old maid, pathetic, jealous failure, ugly, you need plastic surgery. All the things so familiar to people incapable of living without contempt for others. I watched my parents' faces change. Dad paled, Mom flushed and fidgeted. David just silently looked at the screen, but his gaze held no guilt, no realization, only resentment that I had allowed him to see the truth. "That's what your wife thinks of you," I said to him, "and you want me to keep paying for her comfort?" David didn't answer. Only Mom said quietly, "Nicole, I understand it's hard, but he's your brother. He's having difficulties. Without your help, it will be very hard for them." I looked at her and felt something inside me finally freeze. "I've already helped, Mom, and it's enough. I'm not supporting anyone anymore." David stood up. "Fine. Have it your way," he said coldly. The three of them left. Dad didn't say a word. The door simply closed softly, leaving silence behind. I sat looking at the cool dinner and wondered if I had cut everything off too abruptly. But Diana's face rose before my eyes, that expression of contemptuous sneer when she told me to leave my own house, and the doubts disappeared like smoke. 2 weeks passed. I immersed myself in work again, trying not to think about my family, and one afternoon the phone rang. Mom. Her voice was restrained but tired. "Nicole, I just wanted you to know. David and Diana were evicted. They're moving in with us." I listened, thanked her for the information, and said goodbye. I felt a little sorry for my parents. They had let the storm into their house themselves. 2 months flew by quickly. At the clinic, everything settled down. My boss finally dealt with his problems and returned to his duties. I could focus on dentistry without administrative worries again. I spent my free weekends at the lake. Now this place had become a true refuge for me. The water chimed under the wind, and in its reflection, I seemed to see my former self, but calm, free. And then Mom called again. Her voice was tired, as if every word was an effort. "Nicole, I need to talk," she said. "It's about Diana. I can't take it anymore. She's unbearable." I was silent, listening. "She's always dissatisfied with something," Mom continued, "constantly complaining, demands special food, won't eat what I cook. She doesn't like how I clean. She's too cold or too hot. The light, the noise, the smells bother her. Nothing is ever good enough for her." Was all I could muster in response to Mom's complaints. "So now she's bossing you around." Mom sighed heavily, as if her chest could barely bear the weight of all this irritation and fatigue. "You have no idea, Nicole," she said. "Last week, she made your father move the furniture in the living room. She decided, you see, that the sofa should be against a different wall, and you know how his back hurts. He could barely bend over, and she just stood there directing him, like the mistress of the house. Then she went after me, said our kitchen cabinets were a mess, and demanded we rearrange everything. I can hardly stand, my blood pressure spikes, and she doesn't care." I closed my eyes, picturing Mom, with a strained smile, hauling pots and jars, while Diana stood over her, that young, smug woman, accustomed to directing other people's lives as if it were her stage performance. "And what does David say?" I asked. Mom hesitated. "He defends her, as always, says she's just trying to bring order, Every time she does something rude, he finds an excuse. Always excuses. I felt my irritation growing. "Well, you let them move in, Mom," I said. "Now deal with the consequences." "Nicole, please." Her voice became pleading, but I was tired of listening. I hung up without another word. Maybe it sounded cruel, but I had warned them. They didn't listen, and now they were paying for their own indulgence. Another 2 months passed. 4 since I had finally cut ties with David and Diana. During that time, I seemed to come back to life. My affairs were going wonderfully. I was enjoying work again, patients were returning, and my bank account was growing. I even, for the first time in years, thought about buying a new car. That very desire I had always postponed, giving money for others' needs. Everything was finally mine. My time, my earnings, my peace. One afternoon, as I was sitting in my office between appointments, the administrator said my parents were waiting for me. They had come without calling, which was unusual in itself. We met at a small cafe on the corner, which smelled of freshly ground coffee and vanilla buns. We sat at a table by the window, and Mom got straight to the point, without preamble. "David and Diana are getting a divorce." I blinked, not immediately processing what I'd heard. Mom continued. She was dissatisfied with everything, how their life had changed, that they no longer had your money, that they were living with us. It infuriated her that everything had become simpler. Dad intervened in the conversation for the first time in a long while. "She called him worthless," he said quietly, "said he couldn't provide for her, that she deserved better, and she wrote all about it on Facebook for everyone to see." Mom nodded, confirming. She made David a laughingstock, wrote that he was stupid, that marrying him was a mistake. "And what did he do?" I asked. Dad answered. "He snapped, filed for divorce, last week." I leaned back in my chair and slowly nodded. Good. The smartest decision he's ever made. This time, Mom didn't argue. She looked drained, as if there were no strength or words left inside her. Dad was silent, looking into his cup. We finished our coffee and they left, leaving me sitting by the window, watching the occasional passers-by carrying their little lives, in which there were probably Dianas of their own. A few months later, Mom called again. For the first time in a long while, there was something light, even warm in her voice. "The divorce is final," she said. "It's all over." Diana went back to her parents, stopped writing nasty things online. I felt a relief, as if a door that had been banging in the wind for too long had finally closed. Another 2 months later, more news. "David found a job," Mom reported. "A very good one. Earns more than he ever did before." I smiled. That's wonderful. Truly. And I really meant it. Mom added that he had moved out of their house into his own apartment. "He's doing well, Nicole." And I was genuinely happy. It seemed losing Diana was the push he had needed to stand on his own feet. A rare calm set in. I worked, went to the lake house on weekends, now solely mine, my world without interference. The water still shimmered in the moonlight, and sometimes it seemed to me that the lake was listening, preserving every story, every pain. My relationship with my parents gradually improved. A few months later, they came over to apologize. Mom said I had been right about Diana from the very beginning. Dad admitted he should have spoken up back then. I forgave them without hesitation. After all, they are my parents, and I knew their silence came not from indifference, but from fear of losing the balance between their children. David and I didn't communicate much for a long time. I think he was embarrassed. His pride was still licking its wounds, but with time, he started sending me short messages about work, the weather, little things. I replied without pushing. A fragile thread of understanding seemed to form between us, now without money, without reproaches, simply as brother and sister. He no longer asked for help, and that was the best proof of his growing up. About 6 months after the divorce, Mom called again, excited. "You won't believe what happened," she said. I braced myself. "Diana tried to get back with David." I nearly dropped the phone. "What, seriously?" Absolutely serious, Mom confirmed. She called him last week, said she had realized everything, that she regrets it, that she wants everything back. And what did he tell her? I asked, feeling the corners of my mouth lift involuntarily. He said no, absolutely. I smiled widely, almost proudly. Good for him, was all I said. Mom continued. She didn't stop, kept calling, writing, begging. One day she even showed up at his place. He told her he'd call the police if she didn't leave. I exhaled quietly. She's desperate, Nicole, Mom said. I think she finally realized what she lost. David has a great job now, he's earning, he's happy with his life, and she missed out on all that. We talked a bit more, and then I hung up. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a deep, calm satisfaction. The world seemed to have righted itself. Diana always thought she could use people like things, but now she had to pay for it. But the story didn't end there. Just as everything seemed to have found its balance, fate, as it often does, decided to add one last note to this long, drawn-out melody. A week later, late in the evening, with a drizzle outside and me wrapped in a blanket watching TV, my phone suddenly rang. An unfamiliar number lit up the screen, and without thinking twice, I answered anyway. "Hello?" I said. In response came a voice I recognized immediately, though I hadn't heard it for many months. "Nicole, it's Diana." I froze, as if someone had suddenly opened a window and let the cold air of the past into the house. My first thought was to hang up, but curiosity, that treacherous feeling, held me back. "What do you want, Diana?" I asked in an even, almost cold voice. She sighed, and in that sigh was desperation. "I need your help, Nicole. Please. I know I behaved terribly. I know I said a lot of vile things, but I need you to help me get back with David. He won't listen to me. Maybe if you talk to him—" I couldn't help it. I laughed. The laugh escaped on its own, nervously, almost bitterly. "Are you serious?" I said. "After everything you've done, you're calling me to help you get my brother back?" She didn't back down. "I made mistakes. I understand that now. David and I were made for each other. We were good together." I retorted sharply, "No, Diana, you weren't. You treated him like trash. You humiliated him, spent his money, my money. You came into my house, ordered people around, called me names, wrote trash about him online, and now, after all that, you want me to help you?" I suddenly remembered all her insults, every word, as if they were sounding in my head again. "Let me remind you of something," I continued, feeling an old, forgotten irritation boiling inside me. "You called me a leech, threw me out of my own house, wrote to me that I was an old maid, a worthless woman, that I needed plastic surgery for anyone to look my way. You said I was jealous, pathetic. Remember that?" Silence hung on the line. I went on. "You don't deserve someone like my brother. He's too kind for you. You don't know how to treat people well because you don't know what that even means." And then, after a short pause, her voice changed. Malice rang in it. "You're just angry because you're alone," she threw at me. I smirked. "Maybe I am alone," I replied calmly, "but I'd rather be alone than live with someone who treats me the way you treated David, and me." After that, I simply pressed end. That was the last time I heard her voice. But, as often happens, a person's shadow lingers long in news, retellings, rumors. A few months later, Mom told me she had heard something from acquaintances. It turned out Diana hadn't wasted any time. She had fairly quickly found a new man. His name was, I think, Derek. Or maybe Antonio. Mom said he was not a good man. Drinks, is rude, has a dubious crowd. And Diana's mother, it turned out, was in despair. She said the guy also used drugs, and her daughter was sinking back into the same whirlpool they had once tried to pull her out of. "Well," I said to Mom then, "Diana made her bed. Now let her lie in it." Mom sighed heavily but didn't argue. We both knew that's how it had to be. A few more months passed. One Sunday, when the leaves were starting to fall and the evening smelled of smoke, I stopped by my parents' house. David was there too. We hadn't seen each other for a while, and at the table, as Mom was setting out dinner, a lightness was suddenly felt, as if there were no more unspoken things between us. I asked, "So, how are you?" He smiled for the first time truly, calmly, confidently. "I'm great, Nicole. Work is going wonderfully. I got a promotion last month. I'm earning more than I ever imagined." I was sincerely happy for him. "That's wonderful." David was silent for a second, then added, "And I'm seeing someone new. Her name is Chloe. She's a teacher. Kind, smart, the real deal." I smiled. "I'm happy for you. Truly." He looked at me intently, as if he wanted to say something but didn't dare. Then he said quietly, "Nicole, I'm sorry. Sorry for everything. For letting Diana treat you the way she did. For not taking your side when you were right. For taking your money and not appreciating how much care was in it. I was an idiot." I felt tears welling up, but I blinked, not letting them fall. "I forgive you," I said. "It's all in the past." He stood up and hugged me, and in that hug was forgiveness. Real, not from words, but from understanding. I haven't heard anything more about Diana, except that she's still living with that Derek, who drinks and, according to rumors, isn't averse to something stronger. Mom said the last time she was seen, she looked haggard, had put on weight, her hair had lost its shine, her eyes were empty. For a moment, I even felt a little sorry for her, but only for a second. After all, she herself chose the path she took. As for me, I'm doing well. Working at my clinic, patients come, life moves at its measured, calm pace. On weekends, I still go to the lake house. Now it's a place of strength for me where I can just breathe. And, funnily enough, I've started seeing someone too. His name is Michael. He's a teacher. The same one who works at the school where Chloe, David's girlfriend, teaches. They were the ones who introduced us. Michael is a quiet, attentive man with a kind gaze and a sense of humor. I've saved enough to finally afford that car I dreamed of. Next year, I might go to Europe. Alone. Or maybe not alone anymore. My relationship with my parents is warmer than ever, and with David, we're now not just brother and sister, we're family in the full sense of the word. From all this, I learned a few simple but hard lessons. I learned that generosity is beautiful, but if you let people use you, it turns into weakness. I learned that family is important, but respect is more important. And most importantly, that sometimes you need to step back, close the door, and let go to protect yourself, even if it hurts. Because only then does life make room for something real, for peace, warmth, and finally, for yourself.